Well, I think I'll go through the intro here and we can get started with today's Zoom call. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name is Matt Leavitt. I'm the agronomist with University of Minnesota Forever Green. And here today with me is my colleague, Sienna Nesser, who works a lot with Kernza, does a lot of support in the back end with both the ECO program and the Kernza CAP grant. There's our contact information. Just as a call out, if you've not joined us for these previous presentations, we have recorded and uploaded them to YouTube. So if you have interest in watching them at a later date, or if you want to share them with folks, feel free. We'd also love to hear from you as well. If you have ideas or content you'd like to dive deeper on, specific questions about Kernza, or ideas for future webinars, field days, etc. It'd be great to connect. So feel free to reach out to us at any time. And yeah, like I mentioned, we've had 2 of these so far, kind of going through some common, frequently asked questions about growing Kernza in the upper Midwest. It's, different than raising a lot of other crops. And, there's kind of some consistencies to the questions that have come through in my 1 year with the Forever Green initiative here. So like I mentioned, the previous presentations are up on YouTube, same thing with the ones coming up. But today we're going to talk about all things Kernza harvest. I'm sure this will be a pretty interesting discussion here. That's always top of mind for people either new to it or people that have even raised it for multiple years, that producing the crop and harvesting it takes some special adjustments. And we're fortunate to have some expert farmers on the call here to give people a little primer on what they've experienced with harvesting the crop, and want to give you a forum as well to ask your questions. So why we're here, if you've seen this before, primarily geared towards farmers, but obviously, any and all folks on the call here, we're certainly happy to have you along. Would just respectfully ask that you keep the lines of communication open as much as possible for growers to get their questions answered. And we look forward to having a robust discussion. And once again, if you have questions kind of further offline, feel free to get in touch with myself or Sienna as we kind of take this forward here. One thing I'll mention while we're on the topic of harvest is there's a part of our University of Minnesota MDA ECO program that will pay for Kernza testing samples from growers. And this is, growers in the upper Midwest writ large, but other states too will consider it. And this can be testing on, bin run grain. This can be finalized product testing, from anything from vomitoxin and protein and moisture dockage, et cetera. If you want to get a really good handle on what you're working with out of the bin, we'd love to help you out with that. So I can talk through some of the specifics if people have questions about this program, but just wanted to take a moment and make sure you all were aware of this. And, we'd certainly, the money set aside, we'd like to help you out if you need it. So my colleague, Andrew Leach, who I don't believe is on the call today, is going to be coordinating that testing program. I've thrown his contact information up there. And then that link at the bottom, you can also find all the information as well on that URL. So just want to make sure you're all aware of that as we move forward here and get into the presentation. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Carmen Fernholz, longtime organic grower of all different types of crops, and what is one of the early adopter Kernza growers, and really pleased to have his expertise on the call here. So Carmen, with that, I will hand things over to you.
Okay, thanks, Matt. And everybody can hear me, I'm assuming? Good. Yep. Okay. I know Ben and Kurt are also on this team today. We have done no rehearsing, so it's sort of fly by seat of our pants, I guess. And I guess the first thing I would ask is if Ben or Kurt, if you have any slides, maybe if you do, you maybe want to run through those first.
I've got cross section of a conventional combine, and I've got a short video clip of a rotary.
Okay. Do you have anything, Ben?
Excuse me, I do not. I have a bunch of pictures. I could try to show them as sort of a slideshow if we wanted, but I was just going to talk through. So,
Okay, well, I was gonna go through, I'll tell you quickly what I was gonna go through here, and then Ben and Kurt jump in anytime, and I think Matt was certainly open to people putting questions in the chat box so that we can answer all your questions. So I was gonna go through, windrowing or straight cutting, uh, and when to cut, combine settings, including the threshing capacity, storage considerations, issues with straight cutting, and then saving the straw. So as I'm talking, again, I want to repeat this, Ben and Kurt, jump in and add your expertise here. I guess the first question is, how do you determine when the Kernza is ready to harvest? And the clue that I've used over the years is if you take and look at the Kernza seed head and you look across the field, and I'm always thinking something in that 60 to 70, maybe upwards of 75% of the seed heads have a nice arch in them. I think you've seen that picture of that Kernza seed head. Incidentally, I took that picture about 3 or 4 years ago, and I can't believe how widespread it's being used. But anyway, I'm glad we're using it. But that's usually been the indication for me that it looks like the grain is ready to cut. And so, in my experience, there's probably 3 ways to harvest the Kernza. It's either windrowing it and then picking up with a pickup head on a combine after leaving it lay in the windrow for several days, sometimes up to a week or more. Straight cutting it, much like we do with soybeans, or using a stripper head. And I think we'll be able to show a couple of pictures, and I think Matt's got that video of how a stripper head functions, and we can run that when the time is appropriate. So looking at using a windrow or swather and swathing the Kernza, when we determine that it's ripe enough, I'll usually go out and then swath it. What we've done is swath it if we aren't interested in the straw. Swath it at 10 to 12 inches high, because we have a lot of biomass with that Kernza stem. We're looking at, 5 to 6, not 6 feet very often, but at least 4 or 5 feet of stem here. And so if we can, if we're not interested in the straw, we can avoid a lot of this straw going through the combine. It's going to help us in the threshing operation as well. But if you're interested in the straw, then consider cutting it a little bit closer to the ground. On the other hand, with all of that biomass, and you're going to be cutting the straw close to the ground, be somewhat concerned about how much biomass you have in that swath. And if you have, I'm going to say like an 18 or 20 foot windrower, and you're cutting that straw really close to the ground, and you happen to get some wet, rainy weather, it may take a while for that straw to dry out because you got such short stubble, and the swath itself will be laying quite close to the ground, and you won't get the air circulation to dry it down. So if you've got a wider cut, like an 18, 20 foot, take half of that, or maybe 15 of the 18 feet as your swath, so that you don't run into that possibility of the grain going out of condition when it's in the swath. So once it's in the swath, then when is it ready to harvest? Luke and I have harvested within 3 days of swathing it, but I think we were losing some grain at that time. And the reason I say that is because I know the grain or the straw itself dries out fairly quickly. but we were finding that the longer we could leave it in the swath and the drier we could get that grain stem, the easier it would go through the combine. And we also found that if we are cutting at that 12, 8, 10, 12-inch height, the straw does dry out fairly quickly because you do get air circulation even after some wet conditions. So all of these things just really come into play. The other reason that we have to really think about this is because when the seed heads are ripe, the stem is still grass green. And so we want to make sure that that stem gets dried out. And the other reason that you really want to dry it out is because the drier you get that stem, the less of that stem is going to get into the grain hopper. It has a tendency to go out the back end because it is a little bit lighter in weight. So all of those, considerations come into play when we're looking at putting the grain in the swath and then letting it dry and harvesting it then. We've had the Kernza lay in the swath for 7 to 8 days and not really positive weather during those days. In other words, some rain, some cloudiness, some high moisture weather, but found really no issue with the Kernza going out of condition in the swath. I don't know how long it could go laying in that swath, but that's been our experience with it so far in the swath. And
Carmen,
yes,
can I jump in a little bit?
yes, by all means.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so just on your last statement, how long it can lay in a windrow. I think if you don't get rain, one farmer had their Kernza down for 3 weeks this past summer, and it threshed very well afterwards. One technique I like to use is for kind of determining when the Kernza is ready to thresh is take and just cut some seed heads and get, I don't know, a dozen seed heads, something like that. And then have a pair of gloves on and take those seed heads and rub them between your hands like this. And it kind of simulates the threshing action. And if you start out doing that when the Kernza is green, and then you kind of do it every day, you can kind of see the Kernza progress in its threshability. And I think the one thing that the three of us will say is that Kernza is fairly difficult to thresh. So you want to get you want to have the best possible conditions for threshing the Kernza, and typically that's letting stuff be drier. If rain's coming, you have to consider that. But I think generally, if the Kernza is dry, you're going to have better luck threshing, and if it's green, you're going to have a lot of material other than grain, MOG, in the grain tank. So back to you, Carmen. Thanks.
Good, and jump in anytime. And I think what Kurt also mentioned is very critical. We did say that the stem is quite green, and if you don't let that straw get dried out, you have the potential of getting green stems or parts of stems mixed in with your grain. And if it's too high a percent, it can cause the grain to have a higher moisture and not store very well. So getting that straw dry is critical, and just all around a much better condition to have it in when you do harvest.
Maybe just to add, excuse me, just to add to that, yeah.
Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, completely agree. I did a sort of a natural experiment, not by my desiring to, but it just happened this summer. I swathed a couple of rounds. I thought it was maybe just a touch early, but I kind of wanted to get it down, and there was like a week's worth of rain, shockingly, several days of rain that were going to come through. And turned out it actually rained on it, and then what that resulted in, the straw dried out quite a bit more than it would have sort of just naturally. And then I went and combined that, and so I ended up comparing kind of what it looked like from that day to when I did the rest of the field, which was kind of more standard dry down. In any case, it threshed quite a bit better. I wouldn't recommend you doing this, but after the rain, and came out of the head pretty easily after that with less straw coming through. So just to reiterate that, yeah.
I think you make a really good point there, because I've experienced that even with other small grains like wheat or oats or barley. If it gets that lighter rain on it, or doesn't get all that negative weather, it does seem to thresh a little bit better. And I think Kernza would apparently apply the same way. So where do you set the combine? And this is going to be anybody's guess. It's going to depend on the type of machine you have. But just generally speaking, what we've done is set the combine threshing mechanism as tight as we can. In other words, the concaves, and they apply the same whether it's a rotary combine or a old cylinder type combine. Set the concaves as tight as you can. Our guidance has always been set them to where they start clicking with the rotor or the cylinder, and then back off the thickness of a credit card or less, just so that they're not ticking. And then running the rotor or the cylinder as fast as you're comfortable with. And I emphasize comfort because you know your machine, you know how well balanced it is, and you know how well it threshes. And so it's really your call on how fast you want to run that rotor or that cylinder. We've ran it maximum speed that we're comfortable with, and it's worked out very well. Part of the reason you want to run it fast is because you want that rotor or that cylinder to hit that grain as often as it can as it's going through that threshing area of the combine. And so the speed is very critical, and the tightness is important because threshing happens best when you have grain on grain rubbing. That's when your threshing mechanism works the best. And then where to set your sieves. Generally, we will run the top sieve tighter shut and the bottom sieve a little farther open. Have I got that right? No, the opposite. The upper sieve open a little farther, the bottom sieve tighter shut. And part of that reason is that you want the grain to make sure it falls through. And if you have a lot of straw coming on that sieve, you want to make sure that it gets shook out and gets down to that second sieve. The second sieve, what we don't need to worry about is sending it back through the threshing mechanism 2 or 3 times. In fact, it's probably a good idea that you run it through the returns and back through the threshing mechanism, especially with the Kernza, because it like we're finding out, it's hard to thresh, and we want to make sure that we get it threshed as possible. Wind, what we've done is put the wind as high as we can, as long as we're not blowing things out the back end. And so how do you know if you're blowing it out the back end? I think it's just as simple as someone walking behind, preferably with a nice white bed sheet, and catching what's coming out the back of the combine for 10, 15, 20, 30 feet, whatever it is, and then checking to see what you've got. The reason you need to do that is because we all know that Kernza seed is so small, and you really have to look hard to find what's going out in the back of that machine. And so taking that white sheet and gathering what's coming out that back end is the most positive way to determine how you are getting that grain threshed. And there are other ways you can walk behind, grab your hand or a shovel, but I still think that the sheet is the best and most positive way to do it. So you really know what you're getting. And one other thing, and then I would really like Ben and Kurt to jump in here. One other thing that Luke and I found out this year is that what the combine adjusted, as I just said, run that combine as close to full capacity as you possibly can. Just so that you don't want it to plug up, obviously, but feed it as fast or as heavy as you can, because that's where you're going to get most of that grain threshing on grain. And we found that even with MN Clearwater, we were, by running at full capacity, getting upwards of 75% free threshing. And we really feel that running that at that full capacity is probably the biggest reason. It puts a load on the machine, but here again, you as the operator need to know how hard you can push that machine. But running it at that full capacity really seems to be something that we should strive for. Ben and Kurt, jump in here.
Just really quick before we, one question on that, Carmen, does that mean you're driving a little faster, or, you know, just to keep it
Okay.
more full, or, you know, you're
Yeah,
explaining a little bit more?
yeah, good point. I guess what I'm saying is you drive as fast as you need to keep it at that capacity. Obviously, you're going to probably have more plant biomass in different parts of the field. So it's a matter of watching your speed and slowing down or speeding up to maintain that full capacity. Good question.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Ben.
sure. Yeah, just I guess I'd agree with all that. I think it is a little tough to keep it full, just due to the how much of the crop there is. But I wonder even if, Carmen, we could somehow get two swaths together. That might even help that a little bit, because I know I had to drive pretty fast.
Okay.
And Matt was with me actually this year, so he knows he knows how many times I hopped out of the combine to check on things and see how it was going. And I don't know, I think I agree with everything you said. And maybe can I share my screen? I've got a few photos.
Yeah, you bet. You should be set, I think.
Yeah.
Let's see. It doesn't want to, hold on.
And while we're waiting for you to share your screen, Kurt plopped something into the chat there. I just want to make sure everybody saw that. He had a conversation with Richard Magnuson, who was a grass seed producer up in northern Minnesota, and put together a really nice document on combine settings. And I think he'll talk a little bit more about that, but just want to make sure everybody saw that.
Yeah, I just kind of my phone is my brain, and I try to take pictures to document everything. So after many attempts and tries to get to the right setting, this is kind of a profile view of what we ended up with. And you can see this was that, I think the straw was actually a little, could have used another day or so to dry. I don't remember if there's a rain coming or what, but that's where I had it set. This is a John Deere 9500 combine, not a rotary, a cylinder machine. And I experimented with and this is the top sieve, sorry, the rear sieve, the rear extension, I should say. I experimented from anything from closed all the way down to opened all the way up and everything in between. And to get that material to come back around on the return, and not get too much or, you know, get a bad sample, this is kind of where I ended up on that back that back extension. And I set the front sieve about the same. The pre-cleaner is completely shut on this machine. I don't know how many people have those older combines anymore anyway. A lot of people are going to have rotaries. I I couldn't tell you exactly how to set a rotary except for what Carmen said. I think it's probably about the same. And you'll see there's quite a bit of stuff that got kind of stuck in there. You know, I had the wind pretty far up to 900 or 1,000 even, fast as it would go. Well, no, that's not true. I backed it off because it was blowing it out the back.
Yep.
I think I ended up with about 850. And just to kind of show the sample that I got, you know, it's not, you can see a lot of grain in there. I don't know what percentage that would be. There's some grasshoppers and some straw, and then a few unthreshed florets in there. Although this year it was since it was so dry, a lot of those florets, I don't know how much grain was actually in some of those. What I found, I tried to slow the wind speed way down at one point, but then you'd get so much material, even if it went through the return, it just wasn't worth it. I was decently happy with the sample. I think time will tell if this is what it should look like or not. But
I think that sample looks pretty decent myself.
Yeah, that's what I have about that. I could talk more, but go ahead, Kurt.
Yeah, all right. I'm gonna share here also. Let me see, just kind of go, you know, just kind of zero in on what we're talking about. So this is a cylinder machine. Number 6 is the cylinder, and then there's the space between the cylinder and the grate referred to as the concave. And then there's threshing that occurs here, and then this initial threshing goes dumps onto the top sieve, and then anything that walks off the top sieve goes out the back of the combine, and then material the top sieve will be set more open, and so material will fall through the top sieve onto the bottom sieve. And then one thing I like to remember is that anything that gets into the grain tank has to go through the bottom sieve. The bottom sieve, you know, yeah. So and a good trick that Richard Magnuson told me, and this is kind of a thought experiment if you don't have a clean grain sample, but close your bottom sieve all the way, and then throw a clean sample onto the bottom sieve, and slowly open the bottom sieve until that clean sample drops through. And so even if you can't do that, I think conceptually it's a good trick to think of. And then okay, and so anything that walks off the back end of the bottom sieve then comes down to the return elevator, the cross auger, and then the return elevator, and goes back up and gets re-threshed. And so if you do a bunch of re-threshing, that's going to help your percent of pre-threshed grain. And sometimes people will adjust their bottom sieve to run this return elevator at 3/4 capacity to get kind of the maximum amount of threshing on the smaller grain. So, and then talking about setting the combine is that, you know, Carmen said it, you want your concave set almost closed, you know, think of a Kernza kernel, you know, it's about the size of a pencil lead. That's kind of the diameter that you want to, you know, pass through that region. Run the rotor, as Carmen says, as fast as you're comfortable with. I'll be a little bit more aggressive, and I'll say run it as fast as you can. But again, you know, if your combine's going to blow up, doing that probably not a good idea. But and then what I found is that the bottom sieve is what we've done is close the bottom sieve as much as possible. So one thing about this is you're taking the combine and you're setting it at the limits of its adjustability. You're running it as fast as you can. You're running it at the concave as tight as you can. You're running the bottom sieve as tight as you can. If you're having your neighbor come over and thresh your Kernza for you, they probably have never set their combine like that. And in my experience, there's a reluctance to set the combine that way. And if you don't set the combine to these kind of extreme limits, you're not going to get good threshing. So I think it's important to be able to, if you're using a custom operator, to be able to instruct them to make the adjustments that you need to get clean threshing. Just one more picture here, and then just a couple minutes. So here's the anatomy of a Kernza head, and what will happen sometimes is that each one of so you see these florets, these individual florets here. Sometimes when you're threshing, the florets will break into what I call doubles or triples, and that depends on how the threshing mechanism is set up front. So your concave or your rotor and your speed. And so if you get these doubles or triples, you know, they're bigger, they're bigger structures that still have grain in them. And so what you want to do is you want to watch what's coming out of the back of the combine. And if you're in a situation where doubles or triples are coming out the back of the combine, you've got to open up your top sieve so that those doubles or triples can drop through onto the lower sieve, and then the lower sieve is going to take and deliver them back to the return elevator, and they're going to go around and get rethreshed. If your initial threshing is such that you're not getting any doubles and triples, then you can tighten down the top sieve. But I think Carmen said, it's you and Ben also, you've really got to pay attention to what's coming out the back of the combine. One thing I've done is and just one thing, if there's a straw chopper on the combine, you do not want that running when you're back there trying to gather samples. So turn the straw chopper off. It's dangerous. So what I've done that worked well is I got a garbage can lid and kind of walked I walked back in this region and then caught what came off the back. And then that garbage can lid was nice for winnowing. And then when you winnow it down, then you can see what the grain is and what the straw is. So, okay, thanks. Back to you, Carmen.
Good. Okay. One thing I would add here, I think you two people explained it very well. What we've done with the rotor is we put in what we call filler plates.
Yeah.
And what we've got 3 of them. We put 2 of them right where the rotor starts, and then 2 or 3 sets back. But what those filler plates do, and you can get the same things for rotor for cylinder combine, but it keeps the grain in that rotor longer, because then it's actually threshing and rolling that grain through that entire rotor all the way to the end. And that too makes a difference, because then you're keeping grain on grain threshing. I know for John Deere's you can get these filler plates and put them in. I think they're spendy, but you can get them. The other thing is that, at least in the rotor combines, you get what they call small grain concaves, that you have to take out the corn and soybean concave and put in these small grain concaves, because they're closer together and it enhances the threshing that way as well. They are expensive. I can't remember what they cost, but they are expensive. But you don't want to do without them, because unless you're going to run that grain through the combine over and over and over. But they will as well enhance the threshing mechanism in that machine. Kurt, you're shaking your head there.
Sorry, yeah, I totally agree, Carmen. Yeah, so getting the filler plates in, again, this stuff is difficult to thresh. So if you can keep it in the threshing region longer, you're going to get better threshing. And then those filler plates are good. And as Carmen said, you can get basically functional equivalents for either a rotary or a cylinder machine. And then I think I'm not so sure about the concaves, but I know the rotaries do have those small grain screens that, Kernza is just so much smaller than a corn kernel or a soybean. So yeah, all good stuff.
Good.
How long does it take, time-wise to change out those screens?
Those concaves, and that rotary, it's nice to have two guys. And it take you an hour or two, because they are heavy and they are a little bit awkward to get in there, and it can be hard on the fingers. So keep that in mind. But if you can have two people do it, it makes it a whole lot easier for sure. The fillers on the rotary aren't too difficult, because they just hook in then and they wrap them around and then tighten up a bolt on them. They're much more easy to put in.
I think you can get those filler plates at like Sloan or Shoop or something like that too. You don't have to go to the manufacturer.
Good point. Excellent point, in fact, for sure. Well, let's just talk a little bit then about the other two options of combining or harvesting kerns. And the second option is what we call straight cutting. And the combine settings and everything are probably going to be the same. But where the challenge comes with the straight cutting is we got to keep in mind that stem is still green, grass green, when that seed head is ripe. And if you're straight cutting that Kernza, but want to get all of the seed heads, which are at different heights in that field, you will be cutting off some part of that green stem and taking it in through the combine. And it is more of a challenge to get those green stems out of the hopper, or to keep them out of the hopper. The other thing is, with any amount of green stems, you are raising the moisture level in that grain. And so if you're putting it into storage, this definitely has to be taken into consideration. So I would say that if you are straight cutting and getting green stems in the hopper, you have to aerate it once it's in that bin. Now, the other piece that I found, even with small grains, and Kernza is no exception, I like to put it in the bin and leave it steep or just sit there for 24 hours or so, and let the grain sort of warm up just a little bit, and then turn on the fan. And what that does is it sort of draws some of that moisture out of that kernel. And so when you turn the aeration on, you get a fair amount of moisture coming out right then. So putting it in the bin, leaving it for 24 to 30 hours, turn on that fan, and if you go up there, you will feel the moisture coming out of that grain. So I think that that's a good little practice to keep in mind. I don't know, how do you think on that, Ben and Kurt?
Sorry, I'm on mute. Yeah, I completely agree. Just thinking back, and I do have some photos elsewhere, but I don't have them up and ready. But this is my third year harvesting Kernza, I think. Or is it fourth? Anyway, several years. And you put your hand in that sample and you don't think it's very wet. And a moisture tester will give you something, but it's really not accurate. And it's wetter than you think. So just as an example, worked with a local grower, and we put it into a box with a perforated floor, and then put a bin fan on the back of that wagon. And it sat for a couple hours, like you say, and it didn't feel all that wet or hot or anything. But boy, when that fan turned on, I mean, it was a sauna coming out of that grain. So there's definitely a lot of moisture in there. I think, I hadn't really thought about that, Carmen, about how that moisture would come out of the grain into the hole, but that's probably a very efficient way to get it, and that way it doesn't just lock in or something like that. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. It can make a big difference for sure.
Yeah.
One thing I've done, just the way it works out at our farm, is we'll run the Kernza into a gravity box, and then we'll get those tube aerators that are with the point, and you can screw them in. So what I've done is and if it works out, get the tube aerators in there before you run all the currents in, so you don't have to screw them in, but you can screw them in manually. And then I've left those tubes run for 3 weeks or something like that, and just it's kind of like corn sitting in a corn crib. Conceptually, it just comes to a kind of an equilibrium moisture tester. And I think everybody on the call, you don't want your grain spoiling. That's like a nightmare.
Good, good. I'm watching the time here, and I want to make sure we got plenty of time for further discussion. But I would like to talk a little.
Just one question, Carmen. Do
Yeah.
you ever put it in a bin with a false floor? Do you have to make any adjustments to the floor or the perforations or anything like that, or can it just sit in a typical slab?
We've got two different types of floors that we've used. One has got the little round pinholes, and the other's got what they call the slice cut. And we haven't had any issue with either of those. The ones with the pinholes are a lot easier to clean, to get the air through and to clean the bins out. The ones with the slice cut, the Kernza can get sort of caught in there, but you're still getting the air through, and it doesn't appear that the grain falls through those false floors at all.
Okay.
Good.
Great. And yeah, one thing, directly after harvest, this probably goes without saying, but especially right after harvest, if you're putting in a wagon or something, you definitely want to keep that uncovered. You don't want to put grain in a wagon and cover it up with a tarp or something like that, because you want that grain to breathe, especially right after it goes through that post-harvest sweat period.
But just a quick comment to that, Matt. Once you're comfortable with it being in condition and you're leaving it in that gravity box, then cover it. Because if birds and anything else gets in there, it can contaminate it for food grade. So just a piece of caution there for sure. Good point. Go ahead, Kurt.
So I'm not an expert on this, but I think there's like corn and soy, so talking about perforated floors. I think there's corn and soybean perforated floors, which have bigger openings. And then there's the so-called small grain floors. And I've got a small grain floor, and I'm just worried that the Kernza could fall through the corn and soybean grates, but I don't know.
Hey, Kurt, just to that point, I found some photos here. I'll just, if I can share a screen.
Yeah, while he's getting that up, if we've got the amount of hull on the Kernza, it's probably not going to be an issue. But as we get more free threshing, the type of drying floor or false floor is going to make a difference for sure.
So this is actually underneath on that barge box with a perforation, and so you can see a little bit comes through. This was the first year I harvested, and it was with a different machine actually. I don't think it was our fault necessarily, but it didn't get as clean as we wanted. You can see there's a lot more stuff. But it was also an older machine that would plug up on the return, so it wouldn't allow me to run it through that second time. But this is the setup here with a bin fan on the back. That
Nice,
worked really well. They're out there. I don't know where you can get them, but
good.
Nice.
Oh, well, I'll just make a quick comment that when it gets closer to harvest time, we at the U of M within, and that we're probably a little bit more limited by geography on this one, but we do have screw tube fans available for folks to use in the wider community. So if you're in a situation where you're not set up like that, definitely get in touch with us. Yeah, because there's some chatter in the chat box here about getting the grain dry is a really critical step, both for end use, keeping it in condition, but also for end uses as well. So definitely, yeah, something to think through. Do you three have a rule of thumb on storage moisture? Is it less than 12, or do you have some comments there?
I treat it very much like any other small grain, either side of 12%. Good.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Kurt.
I think in that threshing document that's in the chat, Richard Magnuson gave some recommendations. And so those guys are they have experience growing grass seed. And I think that's a lot like Kernza as far as the seed size. I think he said, I'm going off my memory here, I think less than 12% for long-term storage, but I'm not sure. You could check the document.
Good. Matt, would you cue up that video? I'll let you look through it and then we'll talk about it. This is a video of a stripper head. I was driving along on one of my weekend camping trips and I saw this farmer out in the field operating a stripper head. And so I took a few feet of video of it just to give everybody a good idea of what it looks like. And it's a little bit bumpy at the beginning, but bear with me on it. Whenever you're ready, Matt.
Can everybody see that?
Yep. What are they harvesting, Carmen?
This was just spring wheat that they were harvesting. But I wanted to get a good shot of notice how fast that machine is running. He's running at 7 miles an hour. And that's at least I think a 24, maybe a 28-foot stripper head. And there you get an idea of how that stripper head works. And the reason I wanted to really show you that is obviously for speed, by just taking the seed head off of the stem, you're running a lot less material through the combine. So it should really definitely impact how you set your sieves, because you're going to have more grain than crop material. And it should impact how much you can set the wind speed, because you're probably going to have heavier material going through the combine as well. And then of course the speed, it's really nice to go at the faster speed and probably have to go that fast so you keep enough of the material going through the machine. And the final reason is that you're eliminating a lot of other material going through, but at the same time, as I mentioned, that stem is grass green, and there are a number of farmers who will come right behind that Kernza threshing, cut that grass stem, bale it, and it makes some fairly good dry cow forage, especially for winter. So it can serve a double purpose that way. So those would be all the different benefits there. Obviously, a lot of us here don't have those stripper heads in Kansas and in bigger grain countries, Western Dakotas and Montana. This is primarily what most of them use. But I thought in the future, when we all inherit the lottery or something, we could all get one of these stripper heads and use it. But that's about all I have. Just one quick comment. Luke and I have been feeding this Kernza straw to our cows. We will put one bale, we'll put a bale of it in one feeder and a good alfalfa hay in the other feeder. And it's amazing how the cows appear to balance what they want. They'll eat a while at the alfalfa and then go after the Kernza and seem totally satisfied. The other thing we do is then obviously use some of the Kernza on a manure pack, and the cows there are doing a lot of nibbling as well. But we're finding then obviously that we're recirculating that straw, recycling it back to the field either as a manure pack or direct manure droppings from those cows. So all we're really ending up taking off of that land is the Kernza kernel and returning everything else to that soil. That's pretty much all I have. Kurt and Ben, put a bow tie on this.
Let me just do one quick one. So there's I guess like 5 adjustments to the combine, the 2 threshing adjustments, the concave clearance and the rotor cylinder speed, and then the top and bottom sieve openings, and then the fan speed. One other variable is how hard you push the machine and how full you have it. But what I would say, not considering that last one, set the first 4, the rotor speed, or the rotor cylinder speed, the concave clearance, and then your top and bottom sieve openings. Get those as close as you can, and then I think play with the fan, and you can slow the fan down, and you start to get more trash in the tank. And then you can speed the fan up and you start blowing, Kernza kernels up or florets out the back of the out the back of the machine. So I think that the fan is, to me, is kind of the final setting, assuming hopefully that you've got the other 4 set, correctly.
Good.
Yeah, I think just a quick comment. These machines that everything we're talking about is where Kernza is today, and it's experimental with today. And I've often said, well, these machines are not made for Kernza, and that in general, I think is true. However, I work with another guy who has a new, 2 years old Claus 8600 with, it has more of the automatic settings on it, and I'd be curious if anybody else has experience with this with Kernza. But there actually was in the book, I believe it was in German, so I couldn't exactly translate it. I think it was sort of a wheatgrass, and so I'd be curious how the machine, if anybody has experience, how those machines would go ahead and set, because the experience with corn and beans anyway is it's a little counterintuitive how they end up getting set. So
just a quick sidebar. My neighbor's got the latest combine, and he's always cautious about those automatic settings. He took it out of the field the first time and totally plugged it up. And so regardless of what automation we have, there's nothing better than eyesight and looking at it and checking it out. And that goes for everything. Most of you had experience on this. You know that it's what you see and what you look at that's going to be the final determiner for sure.
Yep.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I just want to say, before we open up the floor here to Carmen, Ben, and Kurt, really appreciate you all being willing to join in the call here and share your experiences. This is really valuable, and feel like as much as we can provide a forum for folks like yourself to share your information, that's what we'd like to see. So with that, any questions from the group here in our last remaining minutes? Feel free to type it in the chat or just unmute yourself if you'd like, and you can ask a question.
I would just say that getting your combine set correctly is really important. And it's very easy to have your combine set improperly and have way too much straw in the grain tank. I'm speaking from personal experience.
Totally. And the other thing you will find is that if you put that grain in a grain bin with an unloading auger, if you've got a little too much straw, it'll be hard on the religion to get it out of that bin because it will have a tendency not to flow through that intake sump and through the auger. So that's another reason to try and minimize the amount of straw and other stuff in the combine. Dustin, what's your question?
Yeah, what's the best way to handle when the top of the kernels are mature, but the bottom kernels are still in milk? That was the issue I'm having.
Good question. What we've done, and here again, it's management specific here. As you know, the seed head from Kernza ripens from the top down. And so by the time the very bottom kernels are maybe dry enough, you probably can be losing some of the top kernels. So I use the old farmer technique, and I'll go out there and take a seed head and in my hands crush it and see what I get, bite a couple of the kernels, see how dry they are or not dry, and get an idea of just how green those bottom kernels are. If they're soft but brown and certainly not milky, but maybe chewy, I think we would go for sure in our fields, especially if we're putting them into a windrow. That was the other nice piece about, a nice part about a stripper head, is that you probably give yourself another day or two before you have to go out there and harvest, because you're not putting it in a windrow and having it go through that draper head and knock out some of the kernels. But obviously we don't all have that option, but that's usually what we've done. Check that seed head. When you think it's getting close, check it every day, because it can make a difference from one day to the next. And take that grain, crush it in your hand and see what you've got. And then you make the decision. If it's fairly mature, you're going to have good grain even from those bottom seed grains in that seed head. I don't know, Ben and Kurt.
The one thing I would say is I would be more inclined to wait if I'm not getting shattering at the top of the seed head. If you're starting, if shattering is if you're at the onset of shattering, then you should probably take it. But if shattering isn't occurring yet, then I think you can, wait another day or two, let things ripen up a little bit. So
Kurt, how do you determine if shattering is happening?
So that technique I said, where you take the kernels and rub them between your hands, so if you start when the grain is green and then kind of do it every day or every couple of days, you'll see the progression. And then I guess so you're rubbing between your hands, you can maybe take the top of the kernel and just, twist it lightly between your fingers. Just see how easily it falls off the head. And I think you can just kind of imagine, like if the grain's going to be, picked up in the windrow, it's got to be able to survive that without grain falling onto the ground.
Definitely. I wouldn't wait until you see grain on the ground.
Yeah.
I would certainly be looking before then. And I think what Kurt described is good, to even go and just take a pencil or something and wrap on those green stems and see if anything shakes out as well. Anything that you are comfortable with to determine whether it's shattering or not. Your creative ideas are just as good as anybody else's. Anything else? I think we're about out of time, Matt.
Yeah, we can keep the line open for a few more minutes here if there's other questions. On the Threshing test, yeah. Probably everybody has their pet technique. I usually like to take a nice shock handful and kind of shake it a little bit, like a what happened during a thunderstorm or something, and see what you're getting. But yeah, I mean, any technique to kind of watch it. And it, yeah, like you were saying, Carmen, it can change, on a day-to-day basis, especially if it's real hot and dry.
Definitely. Yeah, we found that out the first year I harvested. We went out there, we were gonna straight cut the Kernza and it was too green. We went out the very next day, checked it, and determined it was ready to go if we swathed it and ended up swathing the whole field. So it was a matter of 24 hours.
Mm-hmm. Bill, did you have a question?
I have a question, yeah. Our Kernza is in a bin with an aerated floor, and we had, once we ran the aeration for a while initially, but not anymore. And I sent in a sample to be tested, and it came in 12.8%. Is that adequate, do you think, for storage, or should we put more air on it?
I would say that's probably fine from my standpoint. I guess maybe other people can weigh in.
I would be comfortable with that. However, what I would do is, if it's going to be in the bin coming into March and April and May, I would check it every 2 to 3 weeks, because the temperature in that bin with a false floor, the temperature of that grain changes, and it starts changing on the bottom of the floor and moves into the center of the grain and then moves up. And so if that grain is in the bin starting in mid to late March, when you start getting those 50 and 60-degree days consecutively and into April and May, keep an eye on it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Well, with that, just want to say again, thank you, Carmen, Ben, and Kurt, for being here and sharing your hard-earned wisdom on combining this crop. I really, really appreciate your time. And thank you all for joining us as well. Just as a call out, our next presentation is going to be on Kernza marketing, and that's 2 weeks from now, same time, 1 p.m. Central on February 21st. So mark your calendars for that, and we'll see you then.
Thanks, Matt. And thanks, Ben and Kurt.
Welcome. No problem.
bet.
Thanks.